Joining me now is Rex Hoggard, senior writer at golfchannel.com, and a very big weekend coming up next weekend. One of my producers described this, Rex, as a Masters Civil War with LIV and the players who are not on the LIV tournament kind of merging together for the first time. How do you view one of the juicier storylines heading into the Masters?
I was actually at the LIV event this week in Orlando, getting ready, talking to some LIV players who are going. There's going to be 18 of them who end up playing the Masters, and just trying to get an idea of what they anticipate. And I think there was two interesting things that I think someone brought up to me. One, the idea that everyone in that Champions Dinner room got along before LIV Golf is probably a misnomer. I mean, there was probably plenty of guys in there that didn't like each other. So the idea of it's going to be a little uncomfortable in that room isn't new. I think just the addition of LIV Golf and everything that we've been through the last year, it will make for some awkward conversations. I will say that a lot of these LIV players, they still live in South Florida. They still hang out at the same golf courses that Rory McIlroy and a lot of the players who stayed on the PGA Tour. They're still friendships. So I think that's getting overblown a lot, but there will certainly be some awkward moments.
I do think about Rory McIlroy as a player that comes to mind in terms of the player that was maybe the most vocal in terms of voicing his displeasure with the departure of these players. It's interesting to get that insight from you that there are still kind of friendships and relationships behind the scene and that might be overblown. That said, how do you see kind of how he is approaching this tournament? He obviously wants a green jacket just because it's a green jacket, and that's eluded him. But is he a guy that might have a little bit of extra fire because of everything that's transpired, just to prove that the PGA Tour is still number one?
I think he's had extra fire really the last year, not just off the golf course as sort of the unofficial spokesperson of the PGA Tour, which is what he has become. But if you look at what he did on the golf course over that span, with everything going on, all of the distractions, he's constantly being asked about it, and he took it on head on. I mean, he completely wanted all of the smoke, and he wanted to be the center of attention. And I do think that fueled him to play better. And going into next week, I don't think that's any different. I mean, look, when it comes to the Masters, I don't think any player needs extra motivation. But certainly, I mean, the last thing Rory's going to want to see is a LIV player putting on a green jacket on Sunday. And you could probably say the same thing about the LIV players. I asked Cam Smith about this week, about the idea, do you have something to prove? Do the LIV players have something to prove? And I think they feel like they do.
So you think both sides are approaching the Masters through the lens of, no, I have something to prove?
Absolutely. I mean, even go back to the European Tour event in Dubai earlier this year, when it was essentially Rory playing Patrick Reed, kind of coming down the stretch on Sunday. He was uniquely motivated to make sure that Patrick Reed, a LIV player, did not beat him because of the message that would send. So I think you're going to just get more of that. It'll be more intense. It'll be more scrutinized at the Masters.
Is there something specific that you see that Rory McIlroy needs to do better at Augusta? Why has the green jacket eluded him?
Probably care less. I mean, that's easy for me to say and probably impossible for him to do, simply because I talked to him right when he was leaving the match play just a few days ago, and I find it fascinating what he was going to do to get ready for the Masters, because in his mind, he's still trying to find the winning formula, right? Like in his mind, he hasn't figured out a way to show up at Augusta and play his best for those 4 days. And so he was actually going to make a trip up to the Masters the week before, just a one-day fly up, see the golf course trip, fly back. He was planning on getting there Sunday. I think it's just an indication. It's probably a perfect indication of how much this means to him. And that's probably what's held him back. Because I don't think you can point to any part of his game and be like, oh, well, he doesn't do this well enough at Augusta. He has the game to win. It's just a matter of, can he get out of his own way?
How much do you think the career Grand Slam weighs on him?
It weighs on him only because we bring it up time and time again. It's always interesting to me how the questions just seem to ramp up heading into this week. And then once it's over, one way or the other, either he gets the green jacket, the career Grand Slam, or not, they essentially go dead. They go quiet for another, 10 months until we get closer to April again. It's only going to get louder. And I think he's well aware. I mean, I think he's probably the first person in the room, if I remember correctly, after he won the Open Championship, pointing out that, oh, I'm just a green jacket away. And so he knows.
He's one of a handful of players who could easily end the weekend with a green jacket. Scotty Scheffler, I think, earned a lot of maybe new fans through the documentary Full Swing, people kind of really enjoying his easygoing style. And he came across so well in that documentary. And he's made what he's done over the last couple of months and even further back look so effortless and easy, at least from my kind of novice vantage point. How big of a favorite should he be considered heading into the Masters?
I put him a pretty big favorite, but then I'm going to kind of lump 3 or 4 players up at the top as favorites. I know that's cheating. You can't do it that way, but it's impossible not to look at how well Rory is playing, all the things that we just talked about, but he's certainly playing well coming in. You would think he would find a way to put himself in contention. I don't think you can dismiss Jon Rahm. I mean, because if he gets on another one of his runs, he could very easily rip off 2 or 3 majors this season. And Scotty, you kind of put them all in the same pot. It sort of depends on what day is which one sort of emerges out of the best. I will say Scotty, and I'm with you. Watching from the outside, and I've asked him this before, like, are you bored playing the game of golf sometimes? Because it doesn't look like when he's on the golf course, he's particularly engaged one way or the other, either angry or overly happy. And he actually wears, the Whoop, I guess, is the device that the players wear now that sort of measures heart rate and everything else like that. And I had asked him at the players, you look like you're about to go comatose on the golf course. Like, are there any times on the golf course? And so at the match play, I asked him again, and he actually pulled out his phone, and we went back to Sunday at the Players. And it's like his heartbeat spiked at 4:02 p.m. And we thought for a minute, and he goes, it's when I chipped in. Like, he knew immediately. And it was just fun to hear him say, I only get nervous when I'm playing well. When I'm playing bad, he's sort of disconnected. And he goes, but when I'm playing well, that's when he's engaged the most.
Well, I guess that's golf, like a microcosm of golf, right? Because if the one thing that's been holding Rory McIlroy back is that he cares too much or that he's gripping the wheel too hard, you would think that a player that is somehow able to not do that, except for when they're chipping in for a huge payday, that would be a tremendous advantage. Now that he is way more on the radar than ever before, and the Masters is its own kind of unique beast, do you think that he'll be able to sort of take that same approach from what you know about Scotty Scheffler? I mean, are we going to see more of his, just who he is, even in a moment like this?
I think in a weird way, he'll actually luck out, because we started this conversation talking about live golf and how the golfers were going to mesh at the Masters. And then we went to Rory, and we didn't get to Scotty until 3 or 4 questions in. And that's fair. I think that's going to be the narrative of the week. And in a weird way, as a defending champ, as a player, as the world number 1, as a guy who comes in here with so much momentum, he's going to be the 3rd or 4th, or after Tiger, probably the 5th storyline going into the Masters. And that's kind of his personality. And I think that's what makes him so unique on the golf course. He wants to win. I mean, he wants to beat everyone he looks at. He was talking about playing game night with his wife, and, oh, she hasn't beaten me in years. And he's crowing about it. Like, man, like, I wouldn't be doing that if I were you. Like, keep that to yourself. But I think that's what makes him such a special player.
So if you put Rory and Scotty Scheffler and maybe Jon Rahm in that first big bucket of guys that deserve the spotlight in terms of favoritism heading in, where do you place like a Max Homa, a Will Zalatoris? Who's in that secondary bucket of guys who could very well emerge and win?
Probably Max. For sure. I think Will Zalatoris, given his record around there, would be impossible to ignore. But I think I've seen the same thing everyone else has on the internet, and he seems to have a putting issue right now. And you don't want to go to that particular golf course not being fully confident with your putting. So I'm not quite sure I put him in the second bucket. I'd put Xander Schauffele in the second bucket. I feel like his game is trending. He seems to be the type of person that would do very, very well if he shows up at Augusta and his game is on form. Then he's not the kind of player that's going to get in his own way, like we talk about with Rory McIlroy. So those are 2 that I would definitely put in that second bucket. And Patrick Cantlay probably as well, because I think what you have right now is you have those top 3 and then probably 5 or 6 just behind them.
And will it reveal itself pretty quickly to you if Xander Schauffele is in form? Was that something that you're going to see on day 1?
Yeah, I would think so. He's normally the type of player. He does get off to fast starts. That's kind of been the knock on Rory, specifically on the Masters the last few years. He was tinkering with a new driver and a new 3-wood at the match play, and Xander I'm talking about, and I was intrigued by the confidence that he has. He's always been a good ball striker, but he feels like with the 2 clubs he has now, specifically designed to Augusta.
it was interesting. That's one of the takeaways I got from Full Swing as well, is just the supreme confidence from the upper echelon of these players on tour compared to everybody else. I mean, I guess that's kind of silly to say, because you think about an elite athlete absolutely needing that, having that be a necessity to believe that they can do it. But it seems like with golf being as mental as it is, it's absolutely kind of do or die, especially at a moment like this.
I would go the other way and say I thought one of the more enjoyable episodes of the Netflix series was Joel Damon, and I don't think anyone would confuse him with being overly confident. That is another way of doing it, and I think Joel is really unique in that aspect. But yes, and probably the other one you brought up, the Scotty Scheffler episode, which I did think was the best episode, only because of the storytelling. I mean, the storytelling between Scotty and Brooks at that stage in their lives, with everything that was going on around the world, it was a glimpse at Brooks that I don't think any of us were anticipating, because here's a guy who had always portrayed the I'm larger than the game. There's only 4 tournaments that matter. I mean, he walked the walk and talked the talk. And to get him in these quiet moments when, at least if you read between the lines, it seems like the only reason he joined Live Golf is because he felt like he was washed on the PGA Tour. So it was a fascinating story. Yeah,
it was. I had more empathy, I think, for him than I have had in the past, with being provided a little bit more insight into how down he actually was, or how he was feeling at that time. Just back to next week, what are your impressions of the course? Because I was reading that the par 3 15 has been lengthened up a little bit. How do you view some of the changes that they've made?
13 will be talked about a lot. I've kind of spoken with players on all the different spectrums. Dustin Johnson was one. He went up there last week and played it. Didn't particularly care for it, not because of the added distance. I mean, we know Dustin is one of the longest players in the game, but because of the way it kind of creates a shoot now, and he just can't start the ball far enough left with his driver to play what he likes to play as a fade. The ball falls left to right, and so that's going to be difficult for him. He was saying he's experimenting with maybe some stronger 3 woods to see if you can do it. I think the interesting thing about 13, and I've asked a lot of different players and gotten pretty much the same answer. The scoring average, everyone feels, is going to remain the same. Whatever the scoring average would have been this year without the new tee box, they feel like would have been regardless with the new tee box. Like, you're just going to end up with more players laying up, playing a wedge into a green that should be played with a wedge. And there'll still be birdies. There'll still be eagles. They just won't do it the way they used to do it.
Is there going to be any kind of tangible difference that you can see as a result of any changes that were made? Or is, I mean, it might not be as straightforward as this, but is there a player in your mind outside of those big 3 that we kind of talked about that you think it's laid out to be more advantageous for than another golfer? Or is it not that simple?
I don't think it's that simple. I mean, look, you can go back to Tiger Woods winning in 97 and Augusta turning from there to Tiger proof it. And there's one common denominator there, and it's length. And so even with the added distance on 13, even with the added distance on 15 that they put in a couple of years ago, the longer players are still always going to have that advantage. Now, there's certain things you can do to mitigate that. It's very much a second shot golf course, and you don't have to be the longest out there. I think we've sort of seen that in recent years. But being one of the longer guys, we're talking about Rory, we're talking about Jon Rahm, certainly Scotty Scheffler's in that category, always helps.
I was reading a proposal that would potentially take effect in 2026 to change the ball for elite players, to take some of that length away. Help everybody kind of understand what is being proposed here and whether you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing.
This is a study that's been going on for years. It was called the distance study that the USGA and the RNA were looking at. And I felt like everyone knew we were angling in this direction. And what the governing bodies are trying to do is to create a modified golf ball just for elite competition. So that would be just start at the PGA Tour and work your way backwards, however far you want to go. That goes all the way back to college and amateur and junior golf. We're not quite sure. That's kind of part of the conversation right now. Essentially, these golf balls, and there's a real fancy way of saying it, but they're looking at golf balls that fly 15% less is what you're going to end up with. As far as my opinion, I will say what the players have told me is it's a twofold issue. One, they feel like, at least the elite players feel like that this is only going to help the longer players. And that's sort of counterintuitive to what you would think, but it's only going to make them that much more dominant. It's only going to make the power that they possess that much more important. The other half of it is it's going to be very expensive. The manufacturers will have to come up with these golf balls. They'll have to build, they'll have to research, they'll have to develop these golf balls. The other part of it is, and I had this discussion this week at the Live event, you can imagine a world where the PGA Tour accepts the local rule, which I would imagine they would, and Live Golf does not. And that puts the tour at a kind of a marketing disadvantage because they can always point to their product and say, look, we have fun. We have real golf balls. They fly 340 yards. Come watch us. So it's a unique situation. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I just want to make sure I understand. So changing the ball and taking some of the distance away in theory, or the percentage that it flies, you said that's actually advantageous for those who hit the ball further?
That's the argument. And I kind of talked to players across the spectrum, maybe some of the not so long players versus the long players. And this really just boils down to simple math. If you're taking 15% off my longest drive, you're doing the same thing all the way down. And so my advantage is still going to be that when you're hitting the guy who's shorter than I am, when you're hitting a 7-iron into this little tiny green, I'm hitting a 9-iron. And that's always going to be my advantage.
Is there anything that changes in terms of ball striking, or would the players be frustrated with having to not just adapt for the distance, but is there anything mechanically that changes? Or is the ball, it sounds silly, but is the ball exactly the same in terms of a ball striking ability?
No, I think the ball would be the same. Again, this goes back to sort of the manufacturers. Someone is going to have to develop this ball. There's going to have to be R&D involved. And what we end up with, and this conversation comes from the manufacturers that I've spoken to, they still have the smartest people in the room. They still have the scientists and the guys with the degrees, and they know how to sit down and figure out how to, I'm not going to say beat the system, but they're going to end up getting to a point where they build this ball to be a better ball. And then they'll have to readdress that whenever that is. That's 20 years from now. I think from the player's perspective, and Rory's actually the one that first brought this up, the idea of, again, a scenario, a universe where the PGA Tour accepts the local rule, goes with the shorter golf ball. If they don't, now you've created a scenario where the players have to decide what's the most important thing. And Rory said the majors are. So the majors would use the restricted flight golf ball. Therefore, he would not use let's call it the old golf ball.
Interesting. Just a couple more for you. I don't want to keep you too much longer because I know you're a very busy guy, especially heading into the Masters. But in terms of big storylines and LIV versus the PGA Tour, this is so fascinating. I think the PGA Tour, at least from my vantage point, again, as an outsider looking in, is that in some ways they were forced to adapt and maybe be a little bit better, and it forced a little bit of change that might ultimately be good for the tour. A lot of people are analyzing LIV and saying this is something of a shell game. You can't, pump money into it forever. How do you sort of see this ending? And can you envision a world right now where the PGA Tour would bend a little bit more than they have before and embraced some kind of synergy or hybrid role with the LIV players, or are we just not even close to being there yet?
Not even close. And this goes straight to leadership. I was actually having this conversation just yesterday with the LIV player about this. And the LIV player said that we're having essentially, how do we come together? How do we build some sort of detente between the two? And the player was very quick to say, no, not with the leadership. And I said, like, you're talking about Jay Monahan and the PGA Tour, but he feels like the same thing applies to Greg Norman, that you have two leaders who are so entrenched right now that they simply won't even get in the same room. And I think most people, regardless of which side you fall on this particular debate, will point to the PGA Tour and ask, why didn't you just have a conversation? Like, before we got to this point, why didn't you just sit in the room and speak with, it wouldn't have been Greg Norman back then, but whoever was running the show at that time with LIV Golf and what they would become. And maybe we end up in this exact same spot. Maybe you end up with two very different leagues and a very, very contentious golf between the two of them. Or maybe you end up with a scenario where LIV Golf plays 10 of their 14 events in the fall, and the PGA Tour doesn't want to play in the fall anyway. So now all of a sudden you have a conversation. And I think eventually we get there, but not with the people who are in charge right now.
Yeah, I wonder if the PGA Tour, you mentioned Jay Monahan, if they were almost surprised by everything that LIV was able to do, maybe from a marketing standpoint, or if they maybe underestimated what Greg Norman was able to bring, or players that would leave. I don't know. I'm not privy to any of those conversations, obviously, but it is fascinating to see how this has played out publicly and how each side is frustrated or feels, proud. And I wonder how it ends. So the sense that you get from talking to LIV players, Rex, do you gather that they are looking forward to this opportunity to play at the Masters even more, because even though it's certainly more profitable for those 18 guys maybe over on LIV, that they miss something about the gravitas, the class factor that comes with the PGA Tour, the fact that is still what the majority of golf fans are watching, even though LIV is this really big, fun sort of carnival-like distraction?
I will say this. I spoke with Bryson DeChambeau, and it's the first time I'd spoken with him, I think, since he left to go to live golf. And I came away with a distinct impression that he missed the attention. And I'm not even saying that in a negative way. And I'm not even saying that there isn't attention at live events. The crowds have been good. Certainly, there's been plenty of reporters out there. But it to your point, it's not on the same scale as the Masters or the other major championships. Neither are PGA Tour events, to be completely fair. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely. Like, this is something that I'm sure all of them had marked on their schedule. And the idea that there's going to be fewer live players qualifying for the next few majors is also probably front and center, that this is an opportunity to sort of solidify your place into the majors going forward.
We haven't touched on Tiger and Phil. I wonder what you think is possible for either of those guys.
At the Masters, as far as contending?
Sorry, yeah, at the Masters.
I wouldn't imagine either one of them. I wouldn't put their odds very high, I guess is the way I would say it, and for probably two different reasons. For Tiger Woods, I mean, we saw it last year. I mean, if there's not the walking involved and the challenge that is Augusta National, which is one of the most difficult walks on the PGA Tour, if it's not for that, if you just put him in front of the golf ball however many times, then I truly believe he can still contend. The swing is still very powerful. The swing is still the thing that we've marveled at for so long. It's the walking. And I saw it take its toll last year at the Masters, and certainly going forward to the other majors that he had played. And it's going to continue to be difficult for him. And the idea that he could somehow find lightning in a bottle 1 week is getting harder and harder for me to believe. That said, I'm out of the Tiger Woods doubting business. I got out of that business a long time ago. So I would still not be surprised, but I just don't see how it happens physically. And then Phil just hasn't been playing very good golf. So I don't know how he finds something that particular week to somehow be in contention.
Was there anything that you saw at the Players that led you to believe that maybe he would be better equipped to handle the physical toll that a course like Augusta would take? I mean, is he in any better shape, any more healed up than he was last time around, which quite honestly, at that point, I mean, was so miraculous that we were just saying, I can't believe this guy's even teeing off.
Yeah, just upright for 72 holes was sort of the amazing part of that. Yes, I think there is. If you talk to people in his camp, if you talk to his trainer from time to time, they do feel like they're moving into a better position, that they have not reached a wall, which I guess was what we were all curious about. Does he get to a point that he just doesn't get any better, given how serious that car accident was, given the fact that he almost didn't leave the hospital with 2 legs? I mean, he's talked about this quite a bit, but they are confident that he continues to move in the right direction. My only hang up is the golf course. If you go back to last year, it wasn't Augusta that I think he was aiming for. I think he was aiming for St. Andrews, because that's a relatively flat golf course. If he gets the right side of the draw and benign conditions, you could definitely see him contending at a place like that. But the physical toll of Augusta is so difficult.
Anything else before I let you go, Rex, that we should be paying attention to? Any players that we haven't discussed? I imagine all eyes will kind of be on Rory and John and Scotty. Who do you give the edge to out of those three? And is there a sleeper?
There probably are some sleepers that you can probably keep your eye on, because Augusta is always really, really good about that. I think what you end up with that particular week, I'm not going to be surprised if you do see a Cam Young or a Dustin Johnson in contention, and they haven't really gotten the reps is the only thing that I would look at and be a little dubious, because they just haven't played that same schedule that they have going in. I don't know that it's going to matter to a guy like Dustin Johnson. I mean, I think he is sort of that unique, talented athlete that he can just show up and put himself into contention. I do have one thing to say. Is that a Gator helmet behind you?
I am. I'm a Florida Gator.
Very nice. Very nice. Go Gators.
That's right. I do. I tend to root for my guys. It's tough when you work in pro sports, and I live in
Billy Horschel. I'll give you that one. So let's go Billy Horschel then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I like it. I'll buy it. I could be biased because I'm on the outside looking in. But Rex, thank you so much. Great insight there. And this should be entertaining, to say the least. I'm going to be fascinated to see who's going to kind of emerge, and bragging rights on the line just makes it that much juicier. Like, you need any extra storylines anyway.
I mean, like I said, you go back to the idea of what we're going to talk about, and you start with LIV Golf and the dynamics between them. And we didn't even talk about Tiger. That to me is the amazing part of all this.
Yeah. Rex, thank you so much.